Taxation, that depressing but constant reality on the minds of everyone.
On a particular spot might turn out to be a breeding ground for mosquitoes. Mere okay for deadline 360.
It is obvious that's a negative relationship between taxes and business.
The government in bringing development to the grassroots. For Deadline 360, I'm Emmanuel Lene.
To generate electricity through nuclear energy, precautionary measures has to be taken. I am Muhammad Nasir reporting for Deadline 360.
Laws and regulations guiding revenue generation in Nigeria.
If the rent gets down to the landlords and business operators, it will eventually make them increase their service charges.
It's good to have you join us this week. I'm Hawa Sali.
Our programs are getting better and fresher. And it's because we are thinking about you. NTA, it's all about you.
Hot Sports cranks up the heat this Saturday with fresh sports news and incisive analysis backed by exciting visuals. Hot Sports, your unique source of sport information, education and entertainment, inimitably delivered via hot, scorching argument where no one blinks. Don't miss it.
Involvement of youths in the development of the continent as 29th summit of the African Union ends in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Senate rejects presidential request for confirmation of Lanre Gbajabiamila as Director General of National Lottery Commission.
Body of late Nigeria's former permanent representative at the United Nations and Dan Masanin Kano, Alhaji Yusuf Metamasule, buried in Kano amid encomiums.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, our focus is on the nagging question of indigence and settler crisis that has led to massive loss of life and property in different parts of the country.
All right, let's tell you a story of a young Nigerian. His name is Chibozo Ago from one of the states in the eastern part of the country where his parents and grandparents are hailed from. But he has never lived anywhere near the southeast of Nigeria, his supposed area of abode. That's right.
Now, as the story goes, Kirian, in 25 years on earth that he has of course, lived. He's been resident in the part other than the southeast of the country. And he's acutely aware that in spite of having spent all his years in his current place of domicile or abode, it is unlikely that he'll be able to secure employment in the state's civil service.
And indeed, Kinsley, you know, the dilemma faced by this young man typifies the frustrating experiences of millions of Nigerians. And how can we forget the plight of Justice Ifeoma Jumbo, the Anambra State-born High Court judge married to an Abia man for nearly 2 decades? The then Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Mariam Aloma Mokhtar, in November 2012, refused to administer the oath of office on Justice Jumbo Ofo as a judge of the Court of Appeal, simply because of a petition alleging she was not from Abia State.
Well, Nigeria, we all know, is a multi-ethnic and multi-religious country. And over time, millions of Nigerians have migrated to other parts of the country for work or just in search of a living, education, or for other reasons. As a result, many Nigerian communities and cities have diverse populations.
Yes, indeed, and often these are divided into the sons of the soil or indigenes of such communities and residents originating from other parts of the country who are considered as settlers, even after continuous residence for over 2 generations or even more.
It is indeed a sad commentary that since the return to democracy in 1999, domestic instability arising from the settler and indigenous people, as well as ethno-religious, inter- and intra-communal conflicts of varying degrees, have claimed hundreds, if not thousands, of lives, and of course left thousands, again, if not millions, displaced.
Indeed, varying degrees. Land ownership claims were central to the violence involving thieves and Hausa-speaking Azeris in Nasarawa State in June 2012. Clashes between local Christians and Hausa Fulani Muslims in Jos, Plateau State, in September of same year. And between thieves and Jukuns in Taraba State in October were also rooted in similar disputes.
Now, experts have argued that these crises were the result of accumulated grievances, anger, and frustration arising from suspicion, mutual distrust, as well as manipulative indigenship and citizenship status in the struggle for power and scarce communal resources between the minority and majority tribes.
And it is also argued that the way the Nigerian state has handled the interaction between indigenes and settlers is part of the problem. Section 25, subsection 1 of the 1999 Constitution promises a single Nigerian citizenship, while Section 42 expressly forbids discrimination against other Nigerians based on the circumstances of their birth.
However, when it comes to defining membership of Nigeria's 36 states, Section 318 of the Constitution as amended promotes, as it were, the special interests of those born of the soil. Now, this specific promotion of nativist rights started, according to some experts, in 1979.
All right. Now, indigenship, therefore, effectively introduces a 2-tier citizenship in Nigeria's 36 states and 774 local government areas. Some can lay claim to ancestral connections to the soil and consequently enjoy indigenship rights, while others have no such ancestral claims and must therefore suffer different degrees of political and social exclusion.
Now, some state governments have gone as far as purging their state services, that is the civil services, of non-indigens, and even when such people come from the same ethnic group, but not from that particular state.
And so, Kingsley, what is at the root of indigent settler crisis in Nigeria? To what extent is the Nigerian constitution fueling the crisis? And what must be done to end the acrimony and violence among indigenes and settlers in communities across the country?
Indeed, Kiriana, these and other questions shall try to elicit responses from our guests in our discussion segment on the program today, which is Good Morning Nigeria, coming to you as always live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. NTA is Africa's largest television network. My name is Kingsley Osadolo. I welcome you to today's edition of the program.
And I am Kirian Umai, also welcoming you to the program. And of course, as usual, in the course of the today's package, we shall bring to you our companion segment, which will include newspaper review, business, sports, foreign, and entertainment news. And we are kick-starting with the news, and Joseph Johnson is our guide. Joseph?
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. The National Assembly resumes today after 2 weeks of Salah break, with the Senate rejecting the presidential request for the confirmation of Lanre Gbajamiabila as Director General of the National Lottery Commission. Now, the rejection followed point of order raised by Senator Sani Yerima after the letter was read by the Senate President.
Let's discuss this particular statement by acting president and see how it relates to our constitutional powers, because the constitution is very, very clear. And this matter is dividing even the senior advocates of Nigeria.
Some other senators in their contribution emphasized the need to clarify issues bordering on the powers of the Senate and confirmation of appointments.
Assembly says you require confirmation. And you cannot go and act until you get that confirmation.
Whoever believes that the law of the land is not constitutional should go to court and seek it to be declared null and void. Until that is done, it remains the law of the land and must be respected.
Clearly, it shows that they don't want this National Assembly to function properly, because there are people that the government wants them, even without confirmation, to work.
And as the House of Representatives resumes after 2 weeks of Salah break, resolved to investigate movable assets from contracts awarded by ministries. This followed a motion moved by Representative Kehinde Agbola from Ekiti State and 7 others who argue that some government ministries, departments and agencies are not accountable for their assets.
And in most cases, the costs are deducted from final payment to contractors without any of the assets being traced, thus accounting for losses to the federal government of over 2 trillion naira in the last 5 years.
I believe, Mr. Speaker, every standing committee should live up to their bidding. They audit every movable assets as related to the ministry upon which they oversight.
Now, away from the resumption of the National Assembly, the body of Dan Masanin Kanu Alhaji Yusuf Maitama Sule have been laid to rest at Wali Mai Geza Cemetery in Kano City. This was after funeral prayers led by Chief Imam of Kano, Professor Emeritus Sani Zaradin. The event witnessed a multitude of Nigerians who thronged the palace of the Emir of Kano to pay their last respects. His body arrived the country via Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport at about 2 p.m. Tuesday afternoon and was moved to Kano, his home state. Dignitaries in attendance include Senate President Bukola Saraki, Emir of Kano Muhammadu Sanusi II, many state governors, members of the National and States Assembly and other notable Nigerians. Alhaji Maitama Sule died at a Cairo hospital in Egypt at the age of 88, where he was flown for medical treatment. A diplomat, politician and an orator of repute, the Dan Masanin Kanu, whom many described as a repository of history, will be remembered for his nationalistic views at all times. In the meantime, the All Progressives Congress APC has described the late elder statesman Yusuf Maitama Sule as a progressive voice who made the country proud in all assignments he undertook for the country. In a statement by the party's National Publicity Secretary Bolaji Abdullahi, the APC also described the late Dan Masanin Kanu as a distinguished public servant and patriot. Similarly, the Minister of Labour and Employment, Chris Ngige, says the death of the foremost leader statesman Maitama Sule is a great loss to Nigeria. Dr. Ngige addressed the late elder statesman as an exceptional character whose lifetime is a book and must be read to all Nigerians. And the former Senate President David Mark, in another statement, expressed sadness over the death of Maitama Sule, whom he described as Nigeria's leading light. In its condolence message, the National Orientation Agency NOA says the nation has lost a courageous voice against national disunity and failing national values. From the condolence message of the leadership of the United Progressives Party, UPP, the national chairman of the party, Dr. Chikwas Okorie, said the party is consoled that the late Dan Masanin Kanu lived a fulfilled life as a devout diplomat, administrator and an orator. The 29th Summit of the African Union has ended in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, with African leaders resolving to promote greater involvement of youth in the development of the continent, expediting action on reform of the Union and enhancing peace and security. Nigeria's Foreign Affairs Minister Geoffrey Yema told correspondent Makut Simon Macham that the unanimous choice of President Muhammadu Buhari to champion the theme for the next summit speaks loud of Nigeria's progress in the fight against corruption.
Issue and a national issue. So for me, it really is saying a lot about the president, saying a lot about Nigeria, and also saying that the African Union is getting ready to deal with that challenge.
The Federal High Court in Abuja has discharged Senator Muhammad Ali Ndume from the 4-count charge bordering on terrorism brought against him by the federal government since 2011. Senator Ndume, who is representing Borno South Senatorial District, was set free by Justice Gabriel Kolawole on grounds that no prima facie case has been established against him. Now, as a result of unrelenting operations of the Nigerian Armed Forces, more than 700 suspected Boko Haram members have surrendered. The Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Tukuru Buratai, announced this at a photo art exhibition organized by the Nigerian Army to mark the 2017 Army Day celebration.
A short while ago, I received the good news that about 700 Boko Haram terrorists within the fringes of the Sambisa forest have surrendered.
What is worth celebrating right now is the freedom that has come to the northeast.
Now to agriculture. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations is assisting Nigeria and other West African countries to develop a strategy towards boosting food security, fishing and aquaculture. Musa Baba Aliu reports that the strategy, which includes the development of fishery policy, is expected to address issues relating to piracy and illegal fishing in the region.
Strategy for the region in all the dimensions of the problem of tackling the problem of the fisheries development.
The overall objective of this program is to enhance the contribution of fisheries resources to sustainable development, food security and poverty alleviation in West Africa.
Finally, inadequate patenting of research findings has been identified as the major setback in the commercialization process of intellectual property in Nigeria. To address the issue, Minister of Science and Technology, Dr. Ogbonnaya Onu, has set up a committee to come up with a template that would lead to commercialization of the various research results lying on the shelves of laboratories and research institutes.
Our research institutes to aim very high. They shouldn't be satisfied with the level that we are today. We have to do far more and make sure that any research finding that deserves commercialization should be protected.
It is when all these institutional infrastructures are put in place, then research and development results that have the potential to translate into product and services could now see the end of the light.
And that's the news for now. Thanks for watching. I'm Joseph Johnson. Kirian and Kinsley will be back after the break.
If you hear a bomb explosion or gunshots of an active shooter, that might be a terror attack. At such times, always remember 3 action words: run, hide, report. Don't try to run towards the terror scene to save the situation, because there might be a second bomb blast or another attack. Run far away and take cover. Make sure you are safe first. Yes, it is in our nature to sympathize over the hurt, but remember, only trained personnel can help in such situations. When in a secured environment, promptly call relevant authorities and help will come. For anonymous reporting, call 09630-3250-5 or 0813-2222-106. If you see something, say something. Nigeria, unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
And now to business matters. Registered forex dealers, the interbank and genuine personal needs continue to be serviced by the forex policy of the Central Bank of Nigeria as the Naira firms up against the dollar at 364 Naira on Tuesday. Details on this and more with Kolo Mohammed on Business News.
Hello and thanks for joining us on Business News. The Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation (NNPC), international oil companies operating in the country and other independent oil companies have lifted crude oil condensate worth about $36 billion between the March of 2016 and March of 2017. This translates to about 11 trillion naira, a figure analysts say may increase given the relative peace that has returned to the Niger Delta region. And from the forex market, indications are that the naira firms up at 364 to the green bag. Registered forex dealers, the interbank and genuine personal needs continue to be serviced by the Central Bank of Nigeria's forex policy. Nigeria is the 19th most attractive economy for investments flowing into the African continent, a report has indicated. The Africa Investment Index 2016 report showed that Nigeria attracted a net foreign direct investment of $3.1 billion in 2015. This, the report says, is in diversifying the economy and layout of a roadmap to enhance public infrastructure and support high-growth sectors in the country, such as manufacturing, ICT, agriculture, amongst others. This is aimed at meeting local demand, along with boosting exports globally in the short to medium term. Nigeria, the biggest economy in Africa with a gross domestic product of $415 billion, is projected to grow to about $595 billion by the year 2020. The federal government has implemented various reforms to boost and restructure the economy, including the introduction of the Nigerian Industrial Revolution Plan, establishing the Enabling Business Environment Council to make Nigeria more attractive for investments. And from the equities market, indications are that the stock market continued its negative trend on Tuesday as the all-share index lost 1.10% to close at 32,410.20 basis points. Now a quick check at the graphic summary of Tuesday's closing figures. That's Business News. Good Morning Nigeria continues right after now. Thanks for watching.
Thank you very much there, Kolo Mohammed, for the Business News. Now we, of course, are moving ahead to take the newspaper review, taking a look at the headlines on the front pages of some of today's newspapers.
And our newspaper reviewer, Bayo Atebi, is in the studio, as always. Bayo, you're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you, Kiri, and good morning. Good morning, Kingsley.
Yeah,
Good morning,
Kingsley, we have to kickstart the review.
Well, that's right. We have a number of papers that we're taking a look at this morning. Let's begin with the Daily Trust. Daily Trust. That's the burial of the late Yusuf Maitama Sule that took place in Kano yesterday. You can see the photograph there on the front page of Daily Trust. And it says the funeral prayer for Alhaji Yusuf Maitama Sule at the Emir's Palace in Kano yesterday. The story, the texts can be found in greater detail on pages 10, 11, and 12. So that's Maitama Sule's burial in Kano yesterday. But the lead story, of course, has to do with politics. Senate to Oshibanjo, sack Magu or face consequences. That's the lead story. Senate to Oshibanjo, sack Magu or face consequences. Now, below the nameplate of Daily Trust, there are two headlines. EFCC arrests Jigawa ex-governor Sanimu Turaki. Details can be found on page 3. And IDPs have become drug addicts. This is attributed to the Borno NDLEA. That's on page 4 in greater detail. Now back again to the bottom half of the Daily Trust newspaper. At the foot of the front page, you have a window of 3 headlines there. Reps summon Fashola over budget. That's on page 3. And Etisalat and creditors reach amicable resolution. And that's according to NCC, the regulator of the industry. Recall, that's the kicker, Melaye's fate falls on Senate, not INEC. This is according to Saraki. Melaye's fate falls on Senate, not INEC. Saraki.
All right, we'll see how that plays out, you know, and here now is Daily Sun. Well, the lead headline here is Senate draws battle line with Oshibanjo. And of course, with writers, threatens action against acting president, then suspends confirmation of presidency nominees. The story is on page 10. And just beside the nameplate, differentiating Anambra Airport City, that's on page 42 of the Daily Sun. And of course, we have the photograph of the burial yesterday of Damasanin Kano, as also read on Daily Trust. The picture is there on Daily Sun. And just below that, we have alleged corruption. EFCC arrests ex-Jigawa Governor Turaki. Page 11 has that story on Daily Sun. And of course, beside that, we have federal government hints of new policy on community policing. Details on page 43. And I have no apologies, retiring top military officers. Basanjo there on page 10 of Daily Sun. And of course, at the foot of the Daily Sun this morning, Igbo sue federal government over appointment of PENCOM DG on page 37. Maybe we have to bring in Bio here. Yes. To do some analysis of some of the headlines we've read so far.
Yes, thank you, Kirian. Well, Dr. Yusuf Maitama Sule, the late Damasanin Kano, was buried yesterday. The federal government delegation was led by the Senate President and dignitaries, including former and serving governors, diplomats, thronged Kano to be part of the ceremony. As characteristic of Kano, the mammoth crowd is reminiscent of what happened when the late Mala Aminu Kano, late Abubakar Rimi, and late Adu Bayero died. It was huge and it caused a lot of problems for security agencies. It was a mere demonstration of the love the people had for him. The story that has dominated all the papers is the Senate decision that henceforth it is going to suspend issues of confirmation of nominees from the executive until all issues regarding the confirmation in the Constitution are held. In that regard, they passed 4 resolutions, and they said the acting president should respect the Constitution and the laws related to confirmation of appointments. Secondly, the acting president should immediately respect rejection of nominees by the Senate. And fourthly, the acting president should withdraw the statement he made that the Senate does not have the power to confirm a certain person. And fourthly, the Senate predicated its decision on its twice rejection of Ibrahim Magu nomination, but he is still functioning. However, there are some senior lawyers who have reacted to this. Some newspapers, including The Nation, have reported that the action of the Senate and their demand are illegal. Professor Ise Sagi says they are legislators, but hungry to be executive body. If they bring government to a halt, they will bear the consequences of that responsibility. Another senior lawyer, senior advocate of Nigeria, Chief Emeka Ngige, says the Senate demand amounts to arm twisting and it is ill-advised. A legal author, described as a person described as a legal author, his name is Sebastian Siyiso. He has likened the Senate's action to blackmail. He says in the presidential system of government, one branch should not blackmail the other. I don't see why there is so much problem with Ibrahim Magu's appointment. The best is to refer it to the court for determination which of the presidency or the National Assembly is right.
All right. It's a pertinent question you've raised again, Bayo, because this is an ongoing spat between the executive and the legislature, and sometimes they just burn in precious time, over matters that ordinarily, can be resolved.
Either could go to court.
Precisely. That's. I mean, if it's assuming it's a question of the acting president expressing his opinion, are they trying to muzzle the acting president from speaking his mind, or has the acting president now translated that into executive fiat? That's the key issue.
And besides all of this, this is a matter of a constitutional interpretation. And again, the Oshibajo happens to be a senior advocate of Nigeria, who has a good understanding, of the constitution and how it should be implemented. But this issue of wrangling between the executive and is becoming.
It is normal. It's normal in democracy. You will have times when the executive and the legislature will disagree, but whenever it arises, the best and the quickest solution is go to the appropriate constitutional court to make a determination, and then the nation can move forward. But the way they are going about it, it is increasing the tension.
Well, that's the if you have regard. If they have regard to Section 6 of the Constitution, that's part of the reason why you have the judiciary, to resolve disputes among the citizens and so on and so forth. Let's check out This Day newspaper. This Day newspaper from top to bottom. Olusonya is interim CEO as Etisalat gets new leadership. And Fowler, of course, is chairman of Federal Inland Revenue Service. Nigeria needs taxes to develop. That's on page 51. And below the name flag is a story on IOCs. IOC stands for International Oil Companies or Corporations, to dispose of more assets after PIB passage and license expiration, with two riders to that, up to $12 billion of portfolio potentially up for grabs, says Ajumagobia, and NNPC saves $2 billion through cheaper contracts. The lead story for this day, Gawan and Obasanjo expressed regret over military incursion into politics and say Nigeria has shed enough blood, and Oshibajo laments poor leadership. And also there on the front page, you have the photograph of some prominent Nigerians who were at the funeral of the late Damasani Kano. That's Maitama Sule, which took place yesterday. Below that, 150 dead and 1,233 houses destroyed in Cross River communal war. Details can be found on page 52.
All right, now moving up to New Telegraph now. Above the nameplate, NNPC secures $2 billion discount on upstream contractors also on this day. Then Baru, drilling in Benue Thorough commences. The story is on page 4. And then the lead story on New Telegraph today is Magu, Senate declares war on Oshibajo, demands immediate replacement of EFCC chairman, suspends confirmation of presidency's nominees, and with the writer Saraki, we will take appropriate actions against acting president. The details of that story is on page 2. Below the photograph we have, as Kingsley read, 101 1,233 houses destroyed, 14,000 displaced. That's on page 4. That's a communal clash which claimed 150 in Cross River State. And at the foot of New Telegraph, blood test could predict miscarriage risk. Details on page 7 of New Telegraph. Bayo.
Yes, there was also a second spat in the House of Representatives. When they resumed yesterday at plenary, they had to summon the Minister of Power, Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola, to appear before them. They alleged that he has breached the privileges of the House. Also, he has maligned the 2017 Appropriation Act. The minister had expressed his frustration publicly over projects submitted by his ministry that they were either expunged, drastically reduced, or reduced by the members of the National Assembly. Spokesperson for the House had asserted that the constitutional right of the members was what they upheld when they worked on the appropriation bill. He also says that since the appropriation bill had been signed and has become an act, they were only required to bring up other supplementary for anything that was concerned. An ad hoc committee has been set up, and it is to summon the Minister for Power, Works and Housing to appear before it to explain why he has breached the privileges of the Senate. Two former military heads of state, Generals Yakubu Gowon and Olusegun Obasanjo, have expressed regret over the military incursion into politics. And they say that incursion by coups had plunged the military itself into politics, violated the military, and also retarded the growth of Nigeria democratically.
Well, that's the story.
Right, that's the benefit of hindsight.
Yes.
Yeah. Benefit of hindsight. I mean, we used to hear all kinds of music on the airwaves up until just a couple of decades ago.
Yeah.
Yes.
And all right, that's much we can take on newspaper review on Good Morning Nigeria for today. We'd like to thank Bayo Atoyabi for being part of the show as usual. We hope to see you tomorrow, Bayo.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. We'll take a short break now, but when we return, we'll go into the nitty-gritty of today's conversation.
The Future Assured project of the wife of the president, Aisha Muhammad Buhari, is carrying out free medical screening and distribution of food items at various IDP camps while ensuring the economic empowerment of women through training and skill acquisition. In recognition of her efforts, wives of governors have lent their voices and support.
In Kogi State, we feel the impact of Future Assured, especially in women and children.
The Future Assured program of Mrs. Aisha Muhammad Buhari, the wife of the president, has been very assuring and still reassuring in Sokoto State. It has impacted positively in the areas of humanity, especially women and children.
Supports the Future Assured initiative. Email programs@futureassured.org.ng. Future Assured, promoting and protecting the lives of Nigerian women and children.
All right, you're welcome back, but if you just tuned in, it's Good Morning Nigeria. We are reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now, every so often, there are reports of conflicts in various communities across the country, and also oftentimes a number of those conflicts have been indicated as having been rooted in matters involving indigents and settlers of the particular community. Let's join our correspondent Ngozi Chude for this background report examining as a prelude to our discussion on the dynamics of communal conflicts in the country.
Nigeria, a country of diversity with more than 250 ethnic groups, each with socio-ethnic boundaries that manifest its unique characters. But man's quest for socio-economic fulfillment has made human movement inevitable. Looking at what obtains in other climes, there is strong evidence that harnessing the diversity has produced great nations like the United States of America. But Nigeria, a diverse nation, has failed to maximize our rich human potentials as the issue of indigents and settlers' rivalry seem to be a recurring stigma. A typical example plays out with settlers, which experts refer to as Nigerians who have their ethnic genealogy away from their point of residence, even if they were born in their particular state or lived all their lives there. For decades, many communities in Nigeria have been weighed down with the indigents and settlers' rivalry as successive governments appear to be overwhelmed by the situation. With communities claiming rights of ownership, the precarious position has over time recorded varying degrees and dimensions of conflicts and colossal loss of lives and properties. The Tiv-Jonko conflict is among the numerous ethnic conflicts that have impeded stability, instigated economic and social dislocation in the country. For the Jonko, the Tiv are perceived as settlers in the present-day Taraba state and needed to have no ownership right to the land they occupy. The Tiv, on the other hand, argued that they have been living for long on the land, therefore claim both land ownership and political rights in the state. Other similar instances are the Aguleri and Umuleri conflict in Anambra State, which recorded in 30 years interval starting from 1936 to 1966 and 1996. The Shakiru-Robo-Wari inter-community conflict in Delta State, the Izar-Ezilo communal conflict in Ebonyi State. Others include the Ife-Modakeke communal conflict in Oyo State, the Hausa Fulani and Biram Anaguta Afizere crisis in Jos Plateau State, and the Zango cutoff crisis in Kaduna State. Consequently, millions of people have been displaced, many left vulnerable to abuses, hunger, infections, epidemics, and other related consequences. The Nigerian Constitution only recognizes the place of citizens in the geopolitical entity known as Nigeria. Chapter 3, Section 25, Section B and C stipulates that every person born in Nigeria after the date of independence, either of whose parents or any of whose grandparents, is a citizen of Nigeria, and every person born outside Nigeria, either of whose parents is a citizen of Nigeria. The question then arises as to what limits a person's rights as a citizen of Nigeria. Like many societies, experts say the indigent settler syndrome is an age-long problem that should be tackled by the strengthening of citizenship rights. How can the nation achieve this, putting into consideration federalism as the main core? What are the issues to be addressed in the indigentship and settlers' rivalry? These and more are what guests will be discussing shortly on Good Morning Nigeria.
And thank you, Ngozi, for that background report. And we're now being joined in the studio by Professor Sam Egu, a political scientist from the University of Jos, joining us in the discussion this morning. Thank you for coming, Professor Sam Egu.
Thank you.
And also with us is Professor Abdullahi Shehu, former Director General of the Intergovernmental Action Group Against Money Laundering in West Africa. So you're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you.
All right. We also have with us in the studios right now, so it's Learned Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Nella Andem Rabana, former Commissioner for Justice and Attorney General, that's Cross River State. Learned Senior Advocate, a pleasure to have you join us this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Okay, and then joining us from our Ibadan Network studios is Dr. Shola Olushola, is a Senior Research Fellow, Institute of Peace and Strategic Studies at the University of Ibadan. Dr. Olushola, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Okay, we're going to have two other guests who will join us later on in the course of the conversation. But let's begin this. This is a matter that has been recurrent for as long as we can remember. The law, some people say, is clear, but also others argue that the law is ambiguous. But in spite of the law, we find that issues that relate essentially to emotions and therefore of the heart continue to rule, and the result are the frequent violent clashes we find amongst settlers and indigents. What is at the root of this, and why has it persisted for this long? Let's begin this conversation with Professor Samuego.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make two quick points about the context in which this has become a problem. The first one is that we are a federal society, and federalism is simply about formal division of power, between different levels of government. But when you have a multi-ethnic society, formal application of federalism is not enough. You therefore have what you call constitutional measures, in order to take into consideration people who are probably disadvantaged, in the context of a federal experience. And this is very important because in our own history of federal experiments, we came to a point where in formulating the 1979 Constitution, the drafters were charged with the task of considering the possibility of putting federal character clauses in the Constitution as a way of mitigating the uneven impacts of the process of modernization in this country. And that was how the 1979 Constitution, I think in section 134, and the present 1999 Constitution in section 147, made allusion to the fact that in implementing the federal character principle, particularly in respect of appointment of ministers, people who should be appointed from a state should be indigenes of that state. And I think this is where the whole idea or the notion of indigeneity got imported into our constitution. But what we have seen since then is the abuse of that concept. In other words, this concept was introduced as a way of strengthening Nigeria's unity and a sense of national community. Unfortunately, what ought to be a solution to the problem of managing diversity has become, a reinforcement to that problem. I think this context is very, very important. And I think the point that also needs to be made very quickly is that where you then want to find out who is indigenous to a community, you run into many problems. As they read to us, the first problem is that you are an indigene of a place, or you are a citizen of Nigeria, not by virtue of your individuality. You acquire your citizenship through your parents or grandparents. And the implication of that is that in tracing your origin, you have to go back to the history of how groups were formed, for you to be able to claim, to establish the authenticity of your membership of the local community. You have to go back into history of migration and so on and so forth. And then people begin to say, well, we settled here before you, and therefore we have access to every other thing at your expense. So my point, therefore, is that here is a very laudable notion that you need to introduce to strengthen the bond of national unity. But it has been unduly politicized. In some instances, it becomes ethnic. In some other instances, it becomes intra-ethnic. But I think we need to really deal with this issue. The boomerang effects of the whole principle of federal character, which you have to implement on the basis of the fact that you need to establish that you belong to a community that is indigenous to a particular state before you can actually benefit, And I think this is the problem that we have run into.
All right, let's bring in Nella here. Professor Hugo has said that the abuse of the concept of federal character is part of the issue in question. And as a senior advocate of Nigeria, would you think that there is ambiguity, in the constitution that established that federal character, vis-a-vis, of course, the boomerang, let me use his word, of what we're having today with respect to communal clashes?
Thank you. I don't think there's any ambiguity. The Constitution clearly contemplates the issue of citizenship and addresses it. It also addresses human rights, but is somewhat silent on the issue of indigence, except, of course, where you're talking about federal character and how it's supposed to play out in appointments. But that's a very limited aspect of the issue. And quite frankly, Nigeria, especially as a country, is very, is very conscious of tradition, ancestry, genealogy, which to me is what indigenship is all about. When you begin to talk about indigents, you also highlight or throw up their culture, throw up affinity, throw up tradition, throw up ancestry, and that ties to land. So, in my opinion, the issue of the Constitution and its wording is not ambiguous. Rather, the fact, although you do have in Chapter 2 an appeal to government for national integration, and the wording of that would include every Nigerian being encouraged to integrate. But as you would also recall, Chapter 2 is not justiciable. So should you, by any stretch of the imagination, violate any of those laudable proposals, which are quite clear? As a matter of fact, if it were justiciable, then you would say maybe you are in violation when you take any deliberate act that excludes someone by virtue of where he is from. They use the word place of origin. But it's not justiciable. So in my opinion, it's not that it's an issue of ambiguity. It's more an issue of refusing to address an issue which is as sensitive as it is. Maybe because in their wisdom they felt it is not an area that they could force, either by legislation, a particular conduct. And it is also left for all of us now to sit down and decide that maybe we need to be more proactive and maybe we need to take more definitive steps to ensure that any Nigerian, any citizen, regardless of where he lives, should be entitled and should be allowed to benefit, just as, in quote, all other indigents. So I'm thinking that it is not an issue of ambiguity. I'm thinking it's more an issue of silence.
All right, Senior Advocate Andem Rabana, thank you very much. We'll come back to you in the course of the conversation. Professor Abdullahi Shehu, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, you listen to the political as well as legal perspectives provided by the other two guests. What's your take on the lingering crisis involving indigents and settlers, and then therefore the conflagration that arises therefrom from time to time?
Thank you very much. As the previous speakers indicated, the Constitution in Section 41 provides for free movement and right of settlement of every citizen in every part of the country. And this is extended to the ECOWAS Treaty that allows every ECOWAS citizen to move freely and settle in any part of the community. Now, the issue is beyond free movement and settlement. The issue is for some political motives. The issue of settlers' indigent conflict arose as a result of the selfish interests of politicians who felt that, well, in order for us to block some people from getting what we are supposed to get, we better flock of this issue so that we can take advantage over one another. Therefore, historically, this has not been an issue until the beginning of this republic. I recall very well during the First Republic from 1960 to 1966, the first Prime Minister of Northern Nigeria, Sir Ahmadu Bello, he embraced virtually everybody who was part and parcel of what was called the Northern region at that time, without any discrimination of religion, ethnicity, or whatever. Now, we saw that coming up towards 1999. Before 1999, as reflected in your background report, we had some skirmishes, the Uguleri, Umuleri, the Ifemo, the Keke, whatever crisis. Now, what has really created more problems in this context is two key factors that, if we don't take time, will even destroy Nigeria. The first one has to do with ethnicity, and the second one is religion. And both the two put together is manifested in a sort of kind of vested interest and impunity, and therefore is the definition of corruption. So the issue of indigenous settler conflict or whatever is a product of political manipulation, and therefore is part of the process of corruption in our political system. We may find a solution to it if we want, but the politicians have to sit and agree as to what benefit we can drive. We have never had an instance where the issue of indigenous settler became a problem in the appointment of a minister in this country. We have had it in appointments at lower levels, maybe in the other arms of government at the federal or at the state level. So to me, it's a creation of politics.
All right, Professor Shehu, thank you very much. Let's bring in again Professor Samego. Professor Samego, your opening salvo tended to situate the problem in practice of federalism and the attempts to cure whatever defects were observed, by way of introducing this into the 1979 Constitution, now replicated in 1999. Some persons argue that other than this just being a matter of politics, it actually relates to identity, and which then, if you drill it down, goes to the question of culture and ultimately sociology. So is it more of politics or just more of identity conflict?
Yeah, I think the most profound comment I want to make about indigenous settler identity and the kind of conflict that's generated is that it becomes a critical question in the context of struggle for local power and resources. And that is where, for me, the political dimension is more important than the sociological dimension. I think the senior advocate of Nigeria made a point, which I agree with, namely that when you talk of indigenous, you talk of place of origin, you talk of culture, yes, this is the truth. And that in Africa particularly, people's identity is tied to the land, where you say, we are sons and daughters of the soil. But that is not the problem. The problem is that where you have people contesting for power and resources at local level, they invoke this identity in order to frame better access to these resources. And I'll give you a few examples very quickly. The indigenous settler thing dates back to actually 1979. And I think the first major problem in that regard was in Wukari between the Jukun and the Tiv people. And the Jukun Tiv crisis, was a very prolonged, protracted one. What happened in 1979 was the local government election in Wukari, where alliance between Hausa and Tiv elements led to the victory of, of a Tiv person as chairman of the local government. Actually, I think a Hausa person became chairman of that local government because of alliance between the Tiv and the Hausa community. And the Jukun felt that this alliance was threatening, their legitimacy, as people who are settled in Wukari, and that disrupted the harmony that existed between the Tiv and the Jukun over centuries. Now, in southern Kaduna, You know, we had the biggest crisis in 1992. And you remember that it was struggle for local power and resources. The whole question of a chairman who is from the local area appointed, then he found out that the markets in Zango Kataf were allocated to some other ethnic groups, and the only way his people could benefit was to relocate the markets, you know. And it was in the context of that a major conflagration broke out in Southern Kaduna, you know, in 1992, leading to the setting up of the Rahila Kujo Commission of Inquiry, you know, which investigated these realities. In Ife, Modakeke, it is struggle for local power, you know, and so on and so forth. So, and in Delta, the Ijo, Ishekiri, Orobotin, where you now go back to who is the first settler here, it's about struggle for power and local resources. And in order to show that you, as the first to settle there, ought to monopolize those political and economic resources, you have to trace history of migration, you know, and that is why the whole question of who came here first has become a major issue. In Nasarawa, and I just want you to know, between the, in Nasarawa Toto, what was the issue? Is the whole question of who owns this place, who ought to control local power, who ought to be the chairman of the local government. And in order to show that you are entitled to this position, you have to show that I first settled before you. And in Africa, this is a very big problem. And I want to finally say, before I yield the ground, that while it is true that land is tied to identity, we also know that pre-colonial Africa had multi-ethnic existence. Africans are very flexible about accommodating others, you know, and we have seen in African history where strangers were given land to farm. They said, look, you can settle here as long as you don't challenge our hegemony, as long as you don't challenge our culture, you know. People, Africans allow others to live. Well, Professor, politics is the issue today.
Professor Sambego, thank you very much. You just touched on the point I actually was going to raise with the learned senior advocate, but we'll come back to her in the course of the conversation.
Because we actually need to go to Ibadan right now to Dr. Shola Olushola, a senior research fellow, Institute of Peace and Strategic Studies. Dr. Shola, you have listened to our panel here in the studio, and Professor Abdullahi talked about the product of political manipulation, and Nella said that there's no ambiguity in the Constitution that established this concept in the first place, while Dr. Egu talking about the struggle for local powers and resources. Now, what's your take in all of this?
Thank you very much. My concern basically is on the national security implication of all of these issues. There is a grave implication of the indigenous settlers matter on the security of the people and even on the human security aspect. Because we have people who have been living together, but those who are regarded as not indigenous don't usually have sense of belonging. In spite of all the campaigns of nationalism and the rest, you still see people, regarding themselves as strangers, even though they have lived all their life, within the midst of their host communities. And I think this is a very, very serious indictment on our sense of nationalism, and it has serious consequences on economic development, on social development, and every other aspect of our social being. So, to that extent, I think this matter is an issue that we need to tackle directly. And we should also address the constitutional aspect of it, because we should not just look at it, from the surface. We should go deeper and discuss it and have a conversation. Do we really want to have a nation? If we do, how do we have a sense of belonging? How do we integrate people who have been living in communities for decades, and how do we ensure that people have, political sense of belonging in the communities that they live? If we don't address all of these issues, it will continue to affect our integration and the consequences on all aspects of our life. And that is just my take on all of this issue.
So, Olusola, thank you very much. Again, we'll come back to you later on. But just to return to our Abuja studios here, Mrs. Andem Rabana, you listen to what Professor Sambegu said. Partly in introducing the political dimension to all of this is raised a number of legal issues, namely how you acquire interest in land, first settlement, conquest, purchase, XYZ. But one thing that he touched on has to do with customary tenancy. The law recognizes the notion of customary tenant. Now, the law also is to the effect, on the basis of various judicial decisions, that no matter how long you stay on a particular piece of land, if you are a customary tenant, you remain a customary tenant. Does this fuel the notion of the settler and indigene crisis that we are seeing in the country, rather than just mere political implications arising from provisions of the Constitution?
Well, let me start by saying that even because I still go, once I talk about indigenes, I always will remind us of the culture. More often than not, even in customary tenancy, you're recognized or you're allowed to use the land. But the idea of an outright transfer does not exist. The rights are vested in the community.
Precisely.
And that in itself gives gives the understanding that you can be here forever, but you don't own. You don't own that land. Of course, even statutory right of occupancy, it's still a distant echo of the same principle that after 99 years it reverts. So there's a reversionary right that goes back to the overlord, if you like, or to the landlord, if you like. And that landlord is the indigene. And the tenant, who has the right to live and to hand over to generations, is still seen as. And of course, for as long as you know that it is, whether you like it or not, it's about survival. Once there's, and quite frankly, I agree that there is political manipulation, but if you ask me personally, it's all about economics. It is once I have an interest, I want to secure my family, I want to advance my interest, then of course, how best can I do it? In that environment, the issue would be, if what would I throw at you to get an advantage? And what I throw at you is the fact that you are a settler. You are not here originally. My forefathers owned this land. Yes, we allowed you. In fact, in most of those cases, they will tell you, yes, 3 generations ago, we allowed you farm. But now, we are saying that because we know that we have generations unborn and we need to protect their interests, so we cannot give you an outright sale. We never give you an outright sale. So, quite frankly, if we want to address the issue, maybe we need to look at legislation, in my opinion, as it impacts economically, and maybe as it impacts politically. But I will always say that when it comes to tradition, and when you have a group of people multiplying and increasing over time, who have not assimilated, they will continue to be settlers that from time to time there will be conflict. That I think is my approach and my take on this issue.
Madam, still with you, this is highly intellectual, but when it comes to the real thing, it's practical, whether it's political, whether it's economics, and what have you. Now, somebody with land ownership and property claims, well, 99 years is the limit, then it can be reversed and all of that. Now, how do you square that up with a nation of diverse ethnicity and diverse culture and tradition, how now do we exist? Because what plays out in the end, at the end of the day, is that after the documentation of what you have just explained to us now, people go practically into fighting, physical fighting and destruction of properties and lives. So what we're saying is that you said there's no ambiguity, in the Constitution, right? The way how do you square that up with the current, even in Cross River State that yesterday, yes, 150 died. How do you square that up with what is practically on the ground with respect to how people react to some of these things, whether it's like 9 years or what have you? Somebody has purchased the property and he said at the point he will hand it over back to the owner and the cycle begins all over again.
I think if you, I maintain the fact that the Constitution as it is not ambiguous, but I think it has not addressed and touched on these issues, which is why there is a need for review. And in that review, the issue of indigenization or indigenship will come up. Settlers will come up. And really there has to be a consensus. There has to be an agreement. You may say, you may exclude, because the reason I'm saying that is that, I'll give you an example. I don't believe that even if you live as an ethnic person, if your genealogy and your lineage does not take you to the Obong's palace, you will never be an Obong. So that is a cultural thing that is sacrosanct and you keep to one side. But that does not mean that if I came as a settler, I should not be entitled to whatever else. If there's free education or whatever else, I should not benefit. Now, it is when you begin to restrict people simply because they, in quotes, are not indigens, then there's disaffection and there's conflict. So I think that the narrative now and the discourse should be on what elements of settlership, what elements of indigenship should be brought expressly into the Constitution. There needs to be a review, clearly.
What are your thoughts? I know that this is just coming from you automatically now. How would you like to see that phrased a bit roughly?
Yes. I would like to see a case where it is in the Constitution that after 10 years or whatever number of years, and that's where the discourse comes, to show that you not only have lived in a place, but you have added value in a place. Because, I always try to look at it from both sides. A lot of people who actually are settlers go in and keep their own culture to such an extent, ensure that their children, they don't mind importing. You've lived in Kaduna for how many years, but you go to somewhere in your village and make sure you bring a wife, just to ensure that that culture and that community is growing within another community. It offends eventually. So what I'm saying is that within the Constitution and after a collective assessment, that there should be something that would qualify a person to become an indigene. Not just as you have a citizenship by birth, by marriage, then you have by a continuous stay over a period of time.
Are you suggesting, I mean, just Andem Rabana is here, is this suggestion to the effect, and this question is going to Professor Shehu, to the effect that you can now legislate culture? Because the example she was citing, fine, so already drifting very well into residency rights rather than, the question of indigenous or citizenship. But can you legislate culture? That's the identity issue. Look, I am who I am, you are who you are, on the basis of your identity. On the basis, and your identity also derives from your culture. Mm-hmm. Can we have a diffusion of culture to such an extent that we no longer know who we are? And if that is not possible, isn't that also at the root of the conflicts that we find amongst between the different cultural groups that cohabit a place?
Well, 99% of the so-called indigenous settler crisis have less to do with land tenancy or property ownership and has more to do with appointments or relevance in society or economic power. Therefore, can we legislate cultural whatever. Well, I think the wisdom is very clear in the Constitution. The drafters of the Constitution applied what one can say an ingenuity by allowing everybody to be a citizen. They defined what citizenship is. They did not define who an Igbo man is, or a Yoruba man is, or a Hausa man is, or any other ethnic group is. But that person knows what he or she is in reality. Therefore, it will be too mundane to expect that to define things that are obvious must go into the Constitution. Those things have already been defined through our cultural practices. Therefore, we should look at this issue from two perspectives. It is unfair for anybody to come and meet a particular group of people who have their culture, who have their own ways of doing things, who have their practices, and then you say, okay, you want to take over from them. There has never been a major crisis because of land dispute. Those things have been resolved within the local legislation, within the national laws, or even on chieftaincy. You cannot migrate from the north to go to the south to become their chief, or to say, okay, you are the landlord here. What usually creates the problem is how do we get relevance? And relevance from when trying to get educational power, to get economic power, to get political power. As a result of that, you say, well, okay, I have been here for long. And if I have been here for long, I think it is unfair to say that I don't belong to this place. I stay here, I respect the laws, I respect the cultures and values of this society, I pay my taxes, I am part and parcel of this society. So why should I not be entitled, why should I not be recognized as somebody that will contribute to the society if I am given opportunity? Take, for example, to drill a borehole. Does it mean anything to you if you don't belong to a community to say, okay, you want to drill a borehole so people can benefit from that? It is not. It is only when people want to appropriate political power or economic power to themselves that they highlight this issue of indigenous settlership. To me, it's a misnomer. And the better we overcome, the earlier we overcome it, the better for our national unity. Because we have seen that all societies that develop around the world, they did not waste their time on who is a settler, who is an indigent. The definition of a citizen and the rights of a citizen are clearly defined in the Constitution. And if we go by that, I think we'll go a long way in promoting national unity, in promoting national security and harmony in Nigeria.
Yes, Professor, thank you very much. No, that's well taken. But I wanted to address your mind to the issue of land ownership, which is also part of what we are discussing this morning. Well, you've talked about the political struggle, or struggle for the scarce resources as part of the issues that heighten the cause of the trouble. But remember, we have communal clashes, according to Sam Egu. The Umulere Agolere, these are two communities from the same local government area. So the issue was land. And even the current, recent ones we had about grazing and no grazing rights and all of that, it is also an issue of land. And those ones have even consumed more lives and property than anything else. So now the question is, if it cannot be enshrined in the Constitution, because culture is culture, tradition is tradition, now how do we get out of the mess? Because it is continuing, it's unabated at the moment. How should we be addressed if it cannot be addressed constitutionally?
Well, as I said, it's not only through the Constitution that all issues are addressed. There are bylaws that are made, and there are traditional practices in all societies. There are ways of alternative dispute resolutions in all our societies. For example, things happen to do with land ownership, things happen to do with farming, grazing rights, etc., etc. In our local communities, the local chiefs, even though they have not been given this responsibility constitutionally, know that it is their duty to settle communal disputes over land. Normally, when there is any dispute on any piece of land in this country, the first thing to do is to go to the local chief to try to settle the issue amicably. It is only when that is not able to, when they are not able to settle it through that kind of community negotiation, that it will now have to go to the court. And whenever such cases go to court, there are sufficient legal provisions that will deal with issue of ownership. You have to trace history. Who first came there? Who is to testify? Elderly people are invited to say, okay, well, over 100 years ago, we used to see the grandfather of so person farming on this land. Why would it now be something that should be of contention? The issue is really, we cannot run about it, is the issue of political and economic power, which people exploit for their own selfish interests and personal aggrandizement, and escalate the issue of indigenous settlership for their own benefits.
Well, Professor Sho, thank you very much. You are obviously in agreement with Professor Sambego that's considering the primacy of politics being ultimately a contestation for scarce resources, allocation of scarce resources to areas of need. We have a number of reactions from our viewers, and these are by way of tweets. You can see the Twitter handle address on the screen, lower left side. That's at NTAGMN, so you can send in your contributions for us to take them. Billy Jack Solomon is the first one we are reading. The resolution of the key issues involved in citizenship and indigenship conflicts will no doubt redefine the concept of federalism in Nigeria.
And Bankole Peter says the state of origin should be discarded and emphasize on state of residence. Our problem started with state creation and revenue sharing.
Mahmoud Haman tweets, indigenous settler syndrome is perpetrated by narrow-minded politicians who see it as the only avenue to access to power and looting.
Yes, I think he continues.
And then he also said, well, of course, replying that you know, the only country where bona fide settlers are not qualified for citizenship, but a foreigner is accorded a citizenship.
All right, from Dennis Philip, the judiciary should be well informed on the need to protect indigenship and citizenship fundamental human rights.
Sonny Michael Makoje tweets, it's so unfortunate that we are still talking about state of origin instead of collectively emphasizing our identity as Nigerians.
And Dele Jackson, my moderators, this involves going beyond mere constitutional provisions to enforcement, as well as the strengthening of statutory provisions.
All right, the last one we're having is from Aminu Uba Al-Hassan. Nigeria isn't that ripe to quash indigenship for citizenship. A particular geography will be marginalized, if not totally dominated. Those are some of the tweets that we are taking in the meantime. Just before we go on a short break and bring in another guest, as well as go over to our Ibadan studios, one question I would like to pose to Mrs. Andem Rabana is as follows. Now, this is not hair splitting. Professor Ego says there are certain internal inconsistencies in the Constitution, but you say there is no ambiguity. Take a look at this. Chapter 3 of the Constitution, 1999, as amended, is clear. Citizenship. It indicates the various ways you can become a citizen. But there is also, almost impliedly, derogation. Go over to Chapter 2, where you talk about federal character principle. In practice, we have seen how that begins now to derogate from the provisions of Chapter 3. Go back again to appointment seat of ministers, XYZ, Section 147, subsection 3, which states, get one minister from each state of the federation, and that person must be an indigene of that state. So don't you find this inconsistency and therefore ambiguity, not as to citizenship, but as to indigenship, and therefore fueling the settler indigenous crisis?
Like I said, I don't see it as ambiguous. Rather, what I see is that it does not cater for, and it does not sufficiently or adequately address the inherent issues within the Constitution, which is why I think it should be reviewed so that we address more particularly the issue, quite frankly, of residency. That is what I think should be addressed. We are very clear who a citizen is and how he becomes a citizen if it's not by birth. We are very clear. We are very clear about the rights of any person. I have always advocated for Chapter 2 being made justiciable. Reason being that they have listed virtually everything that would promote harmony in Nigeria. So it is clear. But at the end of the day, it is an ideal that is not enforceable. And therefore, just as government agencies may or may not do what they are paid to do, so also, if you are within a community and you are an indigent, and it's convenient for you to exclude a settler, you will do so because you are not, there's no sanction tied to that recommendation. So why I maintain that it is not ambiguous is because it looks to me quite deliberate that what they intended to address, they addressed, and what they refused to address, they were silent. So we have seen the negative impact of this dichotomy between settlers and indigents. And it is my personal recommendation that the issue of residence has to be addressed. And to that extent, that is not every little thing that should go into the Constitution. But I believe that every Nigerian, having properly been identified as a Nigerian, should be able to decide where he wants to live. And where he lives, for as long as, of course, he's adding value and is complying with all the general expectations of any good citizen, should be entitled to compete, should be entitled to work.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, madam. Very well said. You know, lawyers, with Kingsley and others. So there is a lacuna.
There's obviously a lacuna.
And because he said that...
you like the word lacuna.
Exactly, because he said that Chapter 2 is not justiciable.
It is not.
So there's a lacuna there that should be addressed. Thank you very much indeed, madam, for being here. Nella Andem, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, and former Commissioner of Justice and the Attorney General of Cross River, say thank you indeed. And of course, you know Cross River is boiling now.
It is boiling.
Something has to be done. Thank you for coming on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much.
All right, you are watching Good Morning Nigeria on the largest TV network in Africa. We will be back in a moment.
Oh boy, climb this thing now. Not be only to connect lights. Come you and yourself now. Now wow. Oh boy, come down now. Oga Kasali electrician, who would they look for with this? Oh, Oga Kasali, come help us fix this wire now.
Sorry, I no longer carry out illegal connection. It puts the lives of people at risk and can cause fire outbreak and disrupt power supply. I will never be part of anything that has to do with this any longer because change begins with me.
Oh boy, letting him talk makes sense. Oh boy, we could carry this ladder from over.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Admission forms for the 2017-2018 academic session of NTA Television College JAWS into its diploma programs are now on sale. The diploma programs are in film and TV production, broadcast journalism, and TV engineering technology. Applicants are required to have at least 5 credits, including English language and mathematics at SSC, NECO, or GCO levels in not more than 1 sitting. Application forms can be obtained from the TV College Refi JAWS or at any NTA zonal centers nationwide on payment of a non-refundable fee of 7,500 naira in bank draft in favor of NTA Television College. Completed application forms should be returned to the Office of the Academic Secretary, NTA Television College, or the Center of Purchase on or before 28th of July 2017. For further inquiries, please call 0806 980 9807 or 0703 660 7155. NTA Television College, training you to be the best you can be.
All right, it's still Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We just signed off a moment ago, Andem Rabana, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. We've been joined now by another guest, this time Honorable Nkoyo Toyo, Nigeria's former ambassador and also former member of the House of Representatives. Honorable Toyo, a pleasure to have you join us on the program.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Then just before we pop our first question to her, let's go back to Dr. Olushola at our Ibadan Network studios. Dr. Olushola, earlier when you were speaking, you were talking about the security dimension to the conflicts that arise as a result of disagreement or disharmony involving indigents and settlers. What do we know? What do we know about, for instance, the socio-economic status of the perpetrators of conflicts in these areas? And usually what acts as the trigger? Why is it that, as Nigerians would say, big men do not appear to be directly involved? Rather, it is persons who are of slightly lower standing in society. What do we know about all of this? And therefore, how might this help in providing solutions to the recurrent conflicts?
Well, usually, such conflicts, ethnic-based conflicts, usually escalate because they are, the mechanism to seek redress, for infraction are often limited, and that is why I quite agree with the senior advocate who argue that the Chapter 2 should be justiciable. If all the provisions are there, and then there's a mechanism for people to seek redress in the court of law, I believe that it will reduce the, the level of conflicts, especially armed conflicts in the communities. And then, moreover, one of the things that I know is that it is not that the big men don't feature in the conflict. Usually, the big men are the ones supporting those who are the foot soldiers when there are, when there are such conflicts. The big men provide all the weapons, they provide the resources to fight and all other things, and also there are economic motives for them. But because they have a lot of things as risk, they stay behind and usually push forward the poor people who usually have very, very little at stake apart from their lives. And because of the prevailing situation, who are even ready to lay down their lives for whatever flimsy reason that is at the root of the indigenous settlers conflict. So my take, therefore, is that let there be a provision in the Constitution. Let us have a dialogue. Let Chapter 2 be justiciable. And if the citizenship have provision in the Constitution and naturalization, of foreigners are allowed, I don't think there is any reason that should bar us from making it very clear in the Constitution, to indicate when people can become, fully integrated and have the same right with so-called indigents in the country. Whereas we are all from the same nation, so we should all have the same right with the so-called indigents. In our communities, because at the end of the day, most of the economic problem that we have, such problems are often at the root of of such conflict. So if we don't insert something in the Constitution, if we don't discuss it, we continue to have a problem, and the big men will continue to have the field day behind the scene as it is.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Shola Olushola, for that submission. Well, we are coming over to you, Honorable Nkoyo Toyo. If you have listened carefully to Professor Olushola, he talked about dialogue. He also talked about the issue of the people who provide the weapons for all these conflicts, which he quoted are the big men. Now, my question is, the political class, has also been blamed for oftentimes capitalizing on the indigent clause and the federal charter principle to gain control over the economic resources and dictate who gets what, when, and how. The people that engaged in the conflict, they're not financially buoyant to even fund some of the weapons used in this fight. So what's your take?
Thank you very much. I think it's important that we pause a bit and think about just the changing character of our population and the pressure that that population puts on the scarce commodities that we have. It's been talked about here that a lot of what we see increasingly are not just issues of the definitions that emerge from law and the context of the Constitution, but it's also a question of the manipulation or the redefinition of the actual nature or practice of what it means to be a citizen of the country. But I think the section that really makes me think twice again is how come in the past we had huge migrations and settlements across Nigeria that did not constitute the kind of challenges that we are seeing today? In Plateau State, for example, we have people who have settled there for decades and years, almost century. And in those times that they moved and resettled in these areas, they were actually in many ways assimilated into those societies, and they became a part and parcel of it to some extent. Increasingly, as we became more in numbers and put more pressure on the scarce commodity and the scarce opportunities that exist, then we found that we had to justify some of the things that we call indigenous and settled now. And this whole question of the identities of persons became a huge question. Now, the question also arises, is it also a function of where we are as a country in terms of our development? Is it possible that if our progression in terms of development had maybe advanced better, and the quality and nature of the citizens' awareness and consciousness would have made a huge difference to the kinds of things and the way they exercise the so-called indigene-settled dichotomy? I think these are all questions which we need to address. It's one thing to legislate a situation. It's another thing in practice to be able to have people who understand the context in which that legislation itself will happen. So if you have largely a poorly informed society, community, it's easier for you to come and tell them about who they are and how different they are from other people. But if you have a more informed and a more self-aware and self-conscious community, I think it's a lot better. And it takes us even to the context of Nigeria. If you look at places like Lagos that are increasingly urban, cosmopolitan, more prosperous in terms of the terms of the population and access to resources and opportunities, you find out that this tying up to whether you are indigene or non-indigene is not as acute, and it's not at the core of the kinds of problems that are happening across the country. So there is also a way in which we can begin to ask the question, is it possible that we tend to see these conflicts in places that are more deprived than places that are more endowed? Is it also possible that it is easier to manipulate because of the kinds of developmental indicators or indices of a certain part? Is it possible, for example, that we see conflicts being prone more in areas of huge poverty and deprivation? So these are huge questions. Or is it also just a function of politics? Is it so easy to manipulate people when there's a circumstance that allows them to see that progression is possible and they can live on the basis? So I think on the one hand, it's one thing to blame the people who give them the arms. It's one thing to talk about the manipulation and the use of politics. But the more important question is, have we not left our people behind in terms of where we need to put them as a developing country? I mean, we are forever developing in these parts, but where do we need to take our citizens to, where the consciousness of what it is to tolerate one another becomes a way of doing things and less? And just to think about this, Section 42 of the law clearly talks about non-discrimination, and it uses the question of indigent citizenship and all of that to contextualize how you cannot discriminate against other people. So there are rights, actually. As much as the Chapter 2 is non-justiciable, Chapter 3 is on your fundamental human rights, and you have a right to insist that, look, what is going on in the community amounts to discrimination against you, and therefore, to that extent, you have rights to accrue into you.
Yeah. Well, that's, thank you very much, Honorable Nkoyo Toyo. Professor Samuel, you listen to what Honorable Toyo just said. Well, what's your take on this? Now, is it more a question of the failure of conflict resolution mechanism Because the conflicts, that's to say the end result of the tension between indigenous and settlers, usually is conflict. Is it a failure of conflict resolution mechanisms, or is it a failure, as you earlier indicated, solely of the tension in the various provisions in the Constitution?
Well, I think in this kind of situation, it's good to look at the many factors that are driving the problem, you know, instead of privileging some factors over others. That is how I would like to see it. But Nkoyo makes very important point, which we have debated at the level of civil society, and which is also reinforced by what we have studied. And what is this? There is a nexus between trends in our development experience and patterns of ethnic and communal conflicts.
Absolutely.
And my understanding of this is that the sharp decline in the Nigerian economy, beginning from the late 70s through the early 80s, up to the era of the structural adjustment, actually, you know, accelerated the level of conflicts. So there is a very strong correlation between economic decline, poverty, you know, and anxiety among people and the level of conflict. That is number one. The second point, and I think I'm happy that NTA is having this discussion today, and there should be many discussions on this issue. Why? Because this country is a country of settlers. There are a few communities that have lived here for centuries, but many people in the Nigerian space today are settlers. People kept on moving from one place to another. I was struck that a research showed that Onitsha is a town, very important town in Anambra State, is traced to Igala people as founders of that community. So if you are looking for the autochthonous groups in Onitsha, there will be the Igala of Kogi State. If there are many Delta communities where you have Igala masquerades attesting to the fact that there has been mixing of communities, movement of people coming together and breaking up. Can you imagine that there's a community in Delta, Ebu, they speak Igala language? I don't need an interpreter. And I heard that these were batches of Igala soldiers left behind, caught behind the enemy line during the Igala-Benin War of 1750. I think we need to appreciate ourselves in terms of our very complex history of movement of people, of migration of people, even encouraged by our liberal constitutions. So what we really need to see is that there are many things that unite us, and we need to identify and reinforce them for the purpose of reinforcing unity. There will be travails, there will be challenges, and I think we need to have a conversation around the important question of national unity and coherence.
All right. Well, I'd like us to...
Sorry, just before... Sorry, Professor Ego was talking about Onitsha and the Gala. You didn't bring in the Benin dimension?
Yes,
your history didn't...
no, I mentioned just the Gala, they also the Benin.
Okay. There's a Benin dimension, yes. Quite right, because even in Onitsha, there are people from Benin. That's what you want to know.
Oguta.
But we may not want to believe that the Igalas founded Onitsha, but
they came. The earliest settlers.
Yes, earliest settlers, as a matter of fact. That is correct. That is correct. Gentlemen and lady, we have a complex situation here because there is high level of consciousness among Nigerians, political and economic consciousness. So now the issue of what triggers all of this may not necessarily be economic or but more political, as Professor Abdullahi raised earlier on, because it is trying to fight for a position of authority and of course the economic powers at the same time that usually bring up this kind of violence and conflict among Nigerians who've been living together for a very long time. Yeah. So now, Professor Abdullahi, in that connection, what would be the solution to this? Because he has boiled down to the fact that people who have lived for a long time break up at a point, for one reason or the other, mainly political, so to speak, before even the who owns the land, comes up.
Well, as the Honorable Nkoyo mentioned, the fact is that these things are occurring perhaps because we have left our people behind in our development effort. In that case, there is a failure of leadership. And if there is a failure of leadership, we need to look at how we can improve the quality of life through better leadership in the country. First, we need to improve our electoral system. To improve the electoral system, we need to educate people, because with greater awareness, people will know their rights, and people will not become easy tools or cannon fodders for the powerful people who will bring them arms or who will instigate them to do certain things contrary to the expectations of society. That is number one. Number two, we need to demand for accountability, because what is happening today is elections are held. The moment people are elected into offices, it's business as usual. Nobody asks anybody to account for what he is doing. So if we insist on accountability, people will be conscious that yes, they have been given responsibility, they need to account to people. Thirdly, we need to be very sincere in our efforts to create a unity by ensuring fairness in whatever we do. It is not only when something is in your own interest that you feel that, okay, it should be done in this way. Let us be very, very sincere in what we are doing as a nation with respect to promoting national unity and national integration, allowing fundamental human rights, allowing also the citizens to have those rights and privileges that we have defined in the fundamental objectives and directive principles of our Constitution.
All right, Professor Shehu, thank you very much. Again, let's quickly go over to the tweets sent in by our viewers. Festus Akimboyewa has this tweet. Now, indigenship in Nigeria has been strengthened above citizenship by traditional rulers and politicians for selfish reasons, and this is a shame.
And now from Chooks Ahiwe, indigenship and place of origin has brought segregation to Nigerians. We only have one Nigeria as a slogan.
Clifford Agugoese tweets, now look at the clamor for autonomous communities in Igbo land, for example, and the creation of mushroom royalties. Governments at all levels fuel communal clashes by using the tactics of divide and rule for political gains.
All right, I'd like to take this from Dele Jackson Solomon. He said, it's high time we paid the cognizance to the national constitution. Government and its citizenry do not recognize the statutory provision of citizenship.
Comrade Tomori Abdul tweets, we are all settlers. Human beings are nomadic in nature.
And Badamosi Adamu says, everyone thinks they are marginalized and agitate for recognition. Well, we must change our attitude by having an ethical revolution.
Mike Ayakwa has this tweet. Indigenous settler crisis normally is created by the political class or caused by the political class. Government should do the needful to nip it in the bud.
Now, from Law Alpha, governments of both federal, state, and local cadres ought to receive 70% of the blame for their inability to provide education. Another one from
Badamasi Adamu is that Nigeria is a heterogeneous society. As such, the earlier we understood our differences and common antecedents that brought us together, the better.
And Law Alpha, once again, said the community clashes exist more in places where there is low level of education and enlightenment of both indigenes and settlers alike.
On the Twitter handle Nexus, we have this tweet. Nigerians were tenaciously bonded with love until corruption crept in. Unfortunately, the present legislature and judiciary is ill.
And Nuhu Jimo says this indigenous and settlers crisis is politically motivated issue by our politicians because of selfish interest and sentiment.
Festus Akimboyewa tweets, if government has the political will to enforce relevant constitutional provisions to strengthen citizenship, communal conflicts will reduce. Now that's the takeoff point for my question to Honorable Nkoyo Toyo. The senior advocate Andem Rabana made a proposition with regard to placing residency rights on the Constitution rather than what we have at the moment. And residency rights, of course, will then address the manifold questions that often arise when people are being asked, what is your state of origin? Where do you come from? Go and get a letter from the local government that you arise, that your parents hail from. Will residency rights be a cure partly to the conflicts that arise from indigenous and settlers?
Very clearly it would. And I want to speak about something I am personally involved with. I'm the focal person for the National Social Investment Program of the federal government in Cross River State. And there is a component of that program that is called Empower. Empower addresses unemployment of young people across the country. And in December last year, it employed 200,000 unemployed graduates. It did that on the basis of residency. It didn't ask people where you come from. It just wanted to be sure that you were working in the place that was the closest place to where you work, you live normally, so that the 30,000 naira they give to each volunteer, we call them volunteer, isn't expended on trying to go to work. Rather, it's expended on their necessities and their needs. Now, can you imagine a situation, and even within the ambit of our law, can you imagine a situation where you say that in every situation where the form says place of origin, it is said place of residence? It won't take 10 years for a significant departure to happen, very significant departure to happen, where people tend to see themselves less in terms of being products of origin, but more in terms of products of residency. And in addition to being products of their residency, those obligations that arise from their residency are clearly defined and attributed. So, for example, issues of taxation are going to become increasingly very, very important. In that same program, we're employing, I think, about 20,000 or so of those young people this time around to be tax collectors who will go to communities and begin to look at how taxation, back to the old days of the income tax people, and how taxation, I mean, that could lead to a whole different debate. But then it also says to me that we are going to begin to ask people, are you paying your taxes? So if you are living in the community, paying taxes, contribution to the development of the community, the issue of residency and origin and indigenship begins to play itself very differently. So I'm saying that even in terms of the practical application of very simplistic tools, without having to go into the whole ambit of whether we need to change the law or not, we have progressive laws. I continue to say that Section 42 on non-discrimination allows a settler to raise very huge questions about the deprivations and the denials that they face. However, in practice, they find that it is difficult to fight a system that is progressively against them. So I want to say that there is a lot that can be done. It is doable. That experience with Empower is teaching us every day that we can actually confront. And I need to say that it hasn't been easy. The political class, like we have called them, have said, where is our slot? Because slot comes from the whole notion of indigene and entitlements. This raises another question which the country has forgotten about.
Namely?
Is there a merit system at all?
Exactly.
Meritocracy has...
Well, that's
because when you throw away merit completely from everything, and then you return to...
I was just wondering what one of the points of we are pressed for time now, unfortunately, unless you have another question. Part of what you said, maybe this is another issue for further discussion. We are seeing, according to her, how residency as a factor has been utilized to drive the Empower project. But we also know that in our laws, residency is critical with regard to personal income tax.
Absolutely.
So what? That hasn't quite translated
exactly
into that.
Play that up
in fact, what I'd like to remind Honorable Nkoyo, when she talked about hiring the younger people to go into the villages to ask people whether they're paying taxes in a situation where the economy is so bad and people, it may raise more issues, more issues, because you have to treat that with caution, you know. Okay, now let's move to Ibadan, where Dr. Shola Olushola is. Your final thoughts, Dr. Olushola.
Well, my final thought is that we should revive the sense of value in our traditional system. And I mean, in the olden days, we embrace strangers. We encourage them. For example, where I live, traditionally, some people migrated from different parts of the country, and they have become parts, of the community. But when politician comes, they are the one that threw up those divisive tendencies. So what I would advise is, let us revive our communal system. Let us revive the system that cherish strangers and embrace them, and encourage them to contribute to the development of the community. If that is done effectively, I believe the whole issue of indigenous settler matter will fizzle out, with time.
At this point, Dr. Olusola, I would like to thank you for your contributions this morning to Good Morning Nigeria. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
Also, we would like to give our appreciation to Professor Abdullahi Shehu. A delight having you join us in our conversation this morning.
Thank you very much.
And also thanks to Honorable Koyo Toyo, former Nigerian ambassador and also former member of the House of Reps.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here this morning. And as well, a delight having always Professor Samegu, Political Science, University of Jos.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Prof.
Thank you so much.
All right, that does it rather for the discussion segment on Good Morning Nigeria. Let's go back to our sports desk very quickly. Yes.
Minister of Youth and Sports Solomon Dalong has congratulated Nigeria's #1 table tennis player Haruna Quadri for booking a ticket as Africa's sole representative to the ITTF